Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office Show. Basketball is back. Preseason play kicked off super early this morning, actually coming from Japan. We're going to talk a little bit about that game. We'll talk about some NBA news. Before we dive into it, though, make sure you are subscribing to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. And don't forget to go follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts as well. We also have the NBA Front Office Show Clips channel where we take some highlights from some of our shows. So subscribe to that one. I'll put the link in the description. Joining me as always is Keith Smith. Keith, how are you doing? Are you as fired up as I am about basketball being back?
Man, I'm excited. I did not get up for the start of the game last night. I actually slept like a baby last night. It was the first good night's sleep we've had here in a little bit, just with everything going on. But it was, it was good. And then when I get up, I was like, I'm gonna put the game on, and started watching this morning, and ended up watching the whole thing. So I'm pretty excited, man. Basketball back. It's NBA basketball back. To be clear, it's great. I love it, and I'll be honest, I could get used to morning hoops. It was a little fun.
It was nice to have that first thing in the morning when you get up. It wasn't necessarily a pretty game, but that's preseason. That's the way it kind of goes. Although I for this game, I was pretty impressed with how involved James Wiseman was. That was one of my big takeaways from this. 20 points, 9 boards. He had a block, 8 for 11 shooting in 24 minutes. It felt like the Warriors were really going out of their way to get him involved. But still, it was a great sign for a guy who's battled injuries to come out there and drop 20 and 9 in his first preseason game of the year.
Yeah, even if he had missed every shot he took, if he looked good physically, that's all we would have really cared about. And he did that and made most of his shots. He had a couple really nice dunks, including one over Kristaps Porzingis on kind of a broken fast break play, which was a really nice finish by him. And then he hit a little baseline jumper, probably about 10-15 foot jump shot that he knocked down, which looked pretty good. He had a nice little jump hook worked in there, and then a couple other dunks in the lane where guys just kind of left it for him. So all around, I thought he looked good physically. I thought he moved well on defense. You could see that's going to take him a little bit of time to catch up to that. I thought Jonathan Kuminga looked pretty good putting the ball on the floor and creating. And then Rui Hachimura made a couple highlight plays in front of the home fans in Japan there to excite people on the Wizards side. So all around for the first preseason game, everybody came out healthy so far, it seems like, too, which that's the number one most important thing. So all around, good start to the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody healthy. That's important. Look, what, 37% shooting from the Warriors, 37% from the Wizards as well, 17% from three from the Wizards, 27% from the Warriors. Preseason basketball at its finest, but they will round into form as we get closer and closer to the regular season starting up. It was just great to see basketball back out there. We did get some news today, though. In fact, I don't know how surprising this was. We talked about it a bit that the Celtics may end up doing something, especially when the Robert Williams knee surgery was turned out to be a little bit more extensive than they initially thought. But the Celtics do land Blake Griffin. We talked about some of the veterans that were out there: LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, Dwight Howard, Hassan Whiteside. There were some other names as well. But Keith, were you surprised that they specifically went with Blake Griffin? And how does this make sense in terms of his skill set and fit?
Yeah, I was surprised because this wasn't. To be honest, I'd kind of expected them to do nothing at this point. I thought they were just going to go with the camp guys and run that way. But adding Blake Griffin makes sense because he fills a couple holes for them. I know a lot of people really wanted them to go get Carmelo Anthony, which I think, as an offensive replacement for Danilo Gallinari, that's probably the best you could do on the market. They're somewhat similar players as far as being shooters who can also punish smaller defenders on switches. The problem is Carmelo would have overlapped a lot with Grant Williams as far as they're both fours. And I think that would have been a little bit of a problem. I don't know how much you can play those two guys together. Where Blake, at this point in his career, he's very much a five. I've seen a lot of people saying, well, probably play at the four. I don't think so. I think he's really a five now, and he can defend fives. Now, I took a little heat on Twitter, as per usual, right? For saying that, but it's not, and it wasn't by any means saying like this is a Rudy Gobert coming in or even a Robert Williams replacement or anything. But he can bang with fives. He can box out. He's gonna do his thing where he takes a ton of charges and he just kind of plays really good, solid positional defense. And then the big thing I think for the Celtics offensively is he is a very good passer. And if you're going to play for them as a big, you need to be able to move the ball because they run a lot of their stuff through the bigs to get Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and the guards clean looks. So yeah, I think Blake all around, fine. It's a minimum signing. If it doesn't work out, you move on. It's not the end of the world. It will cost them some in the tax with that. But if you're a Celtics fan, you should feel pretty good about that too, because this is a team that for a few years looked like they wanted no part of being a tax team. And yet here they are now. They've gone deep into the tax. And this is a move that only adds to that tax bill. And they probably could have said, you know what, let's go. One last thing on this. They did, news came out a little bit after, like maybe 20-30 minutes after. Luke Cornett apparently sprained his ankle. He was going to be a big part of the of the looked like the rotation while Rob Williams was out. And if Cornett's down, that's definitely something that's going to factor in a little bit here. It looks like a week or two for him, so probably right around the start of the season we'll see him, but get another big with experience in there and bring him in.
Yeah, absolutely. That Luke Cornett injury makes it make even more sense that you grab Blake Griffin. I do think that he's not a 4, but he kind of gives you some of the things that you'd be wanting out of a Carmelo Anthony. Like he's almost like a middle ground between a Danilo Gallinari and like a true just rim protecting big and Robert Williams. You're going to get sort of a hybrid of those things. So it makes sense that you can kind of fill either. You're kind of, well, you're killing 2 stones with 1 bird, as Chuck Norris can do, right? That's what you're doing with this. So I think it's just fine as a signing. And like you said, it's very low risk, assuming that it's not your money, right? So it's very low risk in that they can just part ways with him if it doesn't work. It's a veteran minimum signing. Very easy to just say, well, that didn't work. See you later. Next man up. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's for a team that had been very reluctant to get into the tax in recent seasons, just saying, yeah, we'll take on some tax hit. That's important too, because it shows they're very committed to this group despite some very down news over the course of the last month. This is as we record this, the last day of September, man, and it's as Green Day once famously sung, "Wake me up when September ends." As far as the Celtics goes, honestly, as far as the Smith family goes too, it's been it's not been our favorite month of the year, but we're looking up, we're moving on and moving on with Blake Griffin in the fold in Boston.
Keith, before we move on to this next section, dare I hit the button?
Yeah,
is it worth it? Is it
yes,
worth? All right, let's do it.
We have an early trade to announce.
We do have a trade. Kind of. It's a big trade in terms of the number of players that are involved, the Thunder and the Rockets. It is not any kind of a trade that is going to shift the balance of power in the NBA or anything like that. But it's an 8-player trade. Like, it's very rare that you see this happen. I'd imagine the fact that there aren't really any starters involved in this or anything, it makes it maybe a little bit easier to trade some of these guys and make it an 8-player deal because teams aren't quite as worried about the fit or anything like that. But the Thunder trade Derek Favors, Ty Jerome, Mo Harkless. How could you be Mo Harkless? Theo Maledon, and then they're getting from the Houston Rockets David Nwaba, Sterling Brown, Trey Burke, and Marquise Chris coming back.
Yeah, I think the how do I put this? This was one, I don't know if you saw what I put on Twitter, but I said this was one of those like fantasy trades where you're just bored at work and you're like, hey, let's just do a trade. Right. And then it's like, hey, you guys moved around stuff and, nobody's ever going to actually get in your starting lineup except on a bye week or whatever. The Rockets, part of this is pretty simple. They took on a little bit of money and they get a second round pick. So it's like they bought a second round pick here to waive some different guys other than guys they were probably going to waive anyway. It's very highly likely that Brown and Burke and Chris were all going to get waived. And then we'll see. And then on the other side of it, OKC, they were getting very, very close to the tax line, which is not where you want to be if you're a bad team that's in the rebuilding process. And this cleared a significant amount of space for them to go out and do some work there. And, maybe Nwaba sticks. I don't think Burke, Brown, or Chris is going to stick in OKC. I don't think any of them have a home there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really a cap trade. OKC creates a couple of trade exceptions. There's a lot of different ways that they could have structured this deal. Mostly, and this is I think just educational for both sides, or for our viewers and listeners here, is both sides can structure a trade in the way that is most mutually beneficial, so they can do whatever is best for them on their side of it. So how this is likely to break down is into basically 5 kind of individual trades that are being done. It'll be Harkless for Nwaba and Brown, then Maladon for Burke. Chris will go via the minimum exception in the trade to OKC, which then basically leaves Favors and Ty Jerome going to Houston in effect for nothing. Now, it's not nothing because obviously their salary going back the other way, but that's what allows OKC to create then a $10.2 million trade exception and a $4.2 million trade exception. So they'll be able to really do some stuff there. So, good work all around. It's Mo Harkless. A lot of people have asked, how can they trade him right away? They just traded for him, like 2 days ago. The reason is this is a very, very quirky thing in the CBA.
Rare.
Because very rare. Because he was acquired via the disabled player exception, he is able to be aggregated and moved with other salary almost immediately. Now, there's ways, again, like I said, there's a lot of structures here. So there's ways they could do this by not having to reaggregate him, but they are allowed to do that. So we'll see. I don't believe the deal is actually fully processed yet. Generally, we know when the team tweets about it. That the trades happen, but we'll see. And then within a day or two of that, we'll see what the trade exceptions actually land as. But my guess is that's the structure that they most likely came out with to structure this and give them those couple trade exceptions. And then we'll see. Maybe Maladon gets a little bit of a look in Houston. Sounds like Ty Jerome will be waived. That was expected in OKC as well. We'll see what happens with Favors. He's obviously the biggest name in this trade, and we'll see. He's a guy who, if the Rockets waive him, he could definitely catch on somewhere as a backup big man for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. On a veteran minimum, somebody could certainly pick him up. Interesting the way they're going to break that down in terms of the number of transactions and everything, because I was wondering that too, just looking at this, thinking, well, wait, how are the Houston Rockets only paying a little bit of money and getting a second rounder, and yet OKC on the other end is generating these huge trade exceptions and all of this? How does that all reconcile? But it's because they're looking at the trade 2 different ways on each side. The NBA, where trades can become incredibly complicated, even if the players involved aren't actually going to see that many minutes for your team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is very tricky because of that part of a trade where both teams can set it up and structure it the way they want to do that. So that's that's the important thing. It's often we see these, they get reported as one big aggregate transaction because that's what really matters here to 99% of the people. But when you really want to dive in, which if you're watching this show, you probably do, if you really want to dive into it, you get in a little bit deeper and then you see how the actual trade mechanics work. And that's a lot of the fun of it there. Just a couple other minor things with this too. If Harkless is waived by Houston, probably doesn't really have a fit on that roster as they've got a lot of younger players. He could go back to Atlanta, could also go back to the Kings at this point because he's subsequently been moved on to other teams. And the same with Sterling Brown, Trey Burke, or Marquise Chris could all be waived and could all return back to Dallas if the Mavericks so wanted to do so, because that is again, same thing. They've moved on to a third team now. That's the Andrew Bogut rule, which was from a few years ago when he was moved on by the Warriors, and then there was a thought of, well, he might get traded again, and then waived and re-signing Golden State. That is kind of where that came from. So so that once you go to a third team, that wipes out the year long restriction from the most recent team.
Right. And that allows you to return again. One of the ways around that situation, back in the day, the NBA didn't like this thing that was going on quite a bit, where players were getting traded and then waived, and then going right back to the team.
When you think of that, who do you think of with that? Like who do you think of that rule being for?
Zydrunas Ilgauskas.
See, and I think of it as Gary Payton.
Okay.
But which I think is just the Celtics in me, because they traded him for Antoine Walker to the Hawks, with the Hawks immediately waived him, and then he re-signed back in Boston. But yeah, it's most people think Ilgauskas, because I think that was the big one that happened.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of players and, well, all the moves and things that are being made, one of the trades that went down that raised a lot of eyebrows was the Bojan Bogdanovic trade coming out of Utah, and people were shocked. That we heard a couple of weeks before that the Utah Jazz believed that Bogdanovic, Jordan Clarkson, Malik Beasley, each of those guys individually could fetch a first-round pick, and then they traded Bogdanovic, who was the highest card in their hand, for Kelly Olynyk for some reason.
and Saban Lee. And
Saban Lee. And in order to get Saban Lee in the deal, the Pistons had to pay for Saban Lee. They had to go, here, Utah, take Saban Lee, and here's all the money to cover his contract too.
Yep.
But Bogdanovic wanted a contract extension. That's what's being reported now. He was looking for a new deal. I'd imagine that probably has not changed now that he's in Detroit, but that may have well been a factor in the market value for Bogdanovic being a bit lower than people expected, because if a team was either not willing to pay him the asking price or simply not willing to discuss an extension period, that would make them a little bit hesitant to trade for a player that would immediately arrive and be unhappy because he didn't have the contract extension that he wanted.
Yeah. And I kind of get of two minds on those kind of things, because I don't think that should fully dissuade you from going and getting a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic. I know he's an older player now. He's 33 years old. He'll turn 34 just at the very tail end of this season, but he was very good last year. 18 points per game, 45% from the field, 39% from three, 86% from the line. Still gets the line a decent amount, 3.8 free throw attempts per game. Still held up, playing 31 minutes per night. Bogdanovic can play, and I'm kind of sneakily working in my thoughts on this trade, because it happened when I was out sick with COVID. But I like this pickup for Detroit, because I think if you are trying to push forward a little bit and surround your kids with guys who can really play, I think Bogdanovic is really going to help that team. And I think he and Sadiq Bey will form a fairly good starting group. They had enough big man depth between Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren. Obviously, it could move on from Kelly Olynyk there in Detroit. But yeah, I would not have backed off if I were another team, just because Bogdanovic wanted an extension. I think back to, kind of interesting that it's Pistons made this trade. I think back to, remember Jeremy Grant? That was all said of like, well, is anybody going to trade for him? Because Jeremy Grant is demanding this long, expensive contract extension. Well, he got traded to the Trailblazers months ago now, and nothing's happened with that. Now, there's no rush because he's on an expiring deal. They can take it all the way to the very end of the season. But it's, it's just interesting that, that was one of the things that was said then. And, and it seemed like some teams were maybe scared off because he was going to demand it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I just really like Bojan Bogdanovic. So, for this minor of a cost, it seems like there should have been maybe a couple other teams involved.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even if you're just looking at him as an expiring, if you were looking at him though as potentially a guy that you wanted to keep around for a few years, and then he said, well, I'll do an extension, but I want 30 million per season. Like, that's where.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's not getting 30 million per season.
No, I know. I'm exaggerating, but if he came in at a number that teams were simply completely, they were unwilling to go there, then you've got that kind of conflict. You want to bring that, that I'm just saying that's got to be a factor when you're deciding whether or not you're going to trade for a guy.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things you maybe look at there is maybe that's one of those ones where it's like a 3-year, $45 million extension, started a little high, have it come down, and maybe the last year is like half guaranteed or something like that. So you're a little well protected on the back end. But yeah, we'll see. And I mean, if you're Detroit, that could be the kind of thing you're looking to do, right? Because you are only going to have so many of these years where you're running out these super cheap teams because these guys are rookie scale deals that does eventually run out once you have to start extending those players, and you want to kind of pile up the talent while you can. So I really like it for the Pistons. The Jazz side, I think you're hoping maybe they do a little bit better.
Yeah.
We don't even know if Saban Lee makes this team. They've got an awful lot of guards there in Utah already. See what it looks like. But boy, does Danny Ainge love him, Kelly Olynyk. So that is, and honestly, I think it kind of makes sense there. They didn't have a lot at the center spot. So I think you can kind of help them at least get through the early part of the year when you're trying to be at least semi-competitive.
I have to imagine part of the thought process for Utah was we can flip Kelly Olynyk
Yeah.
around the trade deadline to a
Yep.
team who needs another big and maybe pick up a second rounder or whatever it is. So then your final tally on the trade is okay, we got a second out of Bogdanovic. You get something else in addition to, and maybe they do think that Saban Lee can make still a young player, could be some value there
That's
too.
even one too where maybe you take on a little bit of money
Mhm.
in an Olynyk trade, and that's how you get to a first rounder because it's Olynyk plus we took back 20 million in bad salary, and that gets you there. Because the other thing that's important is I like to call these semi-expiring because he's 3 million guaranteed next
Right.
year of his 12 million. So I don't. That's to me that's not bad. But yeah, I know a lot of people, just since we're on the Jazz, I want to kind of talk this. Tony Jones, who covers the Jazz for The Athletic, he's all over everything with Utah. He's been very clear. They're not just going to give away Jordan Clarkson. They're not just going to give away Mike Conley. They're looking to make actual deals with those guys. He actually said he thinks it's more likely that they sign Jordan Clarkson to an extension than it is that they actually trade him. So we'll see what comes of that with Jordan Clarkson. That could be kind of interesting there. Because they're not. Clearly the Jazz are not trying to be very good this year, but I don't think the Jazz are like the Spurs and Pop basically saying, hey, we're going to stink. And, it is what it is. I think they're trying to at least, hey, we're going to be semi-competitive because it can be, the Spurs have kind of had the last couple of years of stepping down after year of playoff contention. Whereas the Jazz, you're going from a team you thought, 2 seasons ago was a finals team to now all of a sudden you're going to be one of the worst teams. That can be a little jarring. So you step it kind of down. And then by the time the fans are attached to a couple of younger players, then all of a sudden it's Mike Conley's not playing anymore. And, player X, Y, and Z are out of the rotation. But I still expect the Jazz to be very busy, all the way through. One guy, though, everybody's trying to steal Jared Vanderbilt. It's not happening. He's young and signed to a great contract. I can't see Utah trading him at all. He fits where they're trying to go.
Yeah, it makes sense that the Vanderbilt probably won't get moved. With the Jazz, I do wonder, like, if it makes sense for the Jazz to have out there, hey, we're not going to give these guys away. We need to get something in return for them and all that kind of stuff. I do wonder if that changes, though, come December, come January, if they've accidentally won a little bit too much. When you look at the NBA right now, there is and maybe this is in part due to the play-in tournament, but there's a very clear line between the teams that are trying and the teams that are not trying. And the tank race to the bottom, I think, is actually going to be very, very tight this year. It's going to be very close. I don't think there's going to be a lot of a margin for error. So the Jazz, I mean, again, you never know with the lottery, but if you mess around with this too much, and you play guys like Clarkson, like Conley, you give these guys a bunch of minutes and you accidentally pick up even a couple of wins that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise, that could be the difference between getting the next star in the draft and really pushing your franchise forward and not. I mean, it's something they're going to have to keep in mind.
Yeah, even with the flattened lottery odds, you still in a draft like this where you have Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson at the top, which, by the way, you can check them out playing against each other coming up this week in Las Vegas. Those games that Wembanyama's Metropolitans 92 team in France is going to play the G League Ignite in a pair of exhibition games, and they are both going to be broadcast by, I believe, on ESPN2, I think it is, and then on the new NBA app. is going to carry those as well. But yeah, when you've got two talents like that, you want to be at the top of those lottery odds with the ping pong balls. You to your point, yeah, when winning an extra game over Charlotte or Orlando or Oklahoma City, and then all of a sudden you're behind one of those teams and you miss out by a ping pong ball, you're not going to be real happy about that. So you definitely want to be in that mix. And that's where too, I know they're saying, they won't give those guys away, but yeah, I mean, it's not, they said that about Bogdanovic and they didn't give him away, but it's, clearly they don't need a massive haul back. They got their massive haul for Mitchell and Gobert. Now it's just about, resetting the books and getting some stuff back the other way.
Absolutely. All right.
Oh, we got one more. Jay Crowder from our buddy Mark Stein. Right. Just similar to Bogdanovic. Sounds like he went to the Suns and said, "Hey, I'd like a contract extension." And the Suns said, "We don't want to. We're not sure you're going to start anymore, and you're certainly probably not going to finish games." And then that's what it sounds like. Both sides said, "All right, okay, let's break this one up." So Crowder's getting to that point too of his career where contract extension or not, that's a little, we'll see, right? He's got to play better than he did last year. He just was not very good last season, so he needs to show more this year wherever it is. But we know, as we talked about on the last show, it won't be in Phoenix.
That's right. They're going to move him on somewhere. Will they get it done before the season? That's going to be something that we'll keep an eye on. Again, just a decision that the Suns have decided to make. And look, Cam Johnson, arrow pointing up. I think he's going to be in line for big minutes this year. All right, everybody. Appreciate you for joining us. Make sure that you do subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. Ring that notification
bell. 20K, baby.
That's
25K next, 50K soon after that.
Right.
Let's go.
That's right. We are moving
the
right
sky
along.
Is the roof? Is that wasn't that what Michael Jordan said?
That sounds about right.
Ceiling is the roof or something. I don't know.
Whatever. We're breaking through. We're breaking through.
Yeah, right there. Gonna punch all the way through the moon.
That's right. Make sure you subscribe. Till next time, everybody. See ya and stay safe.